Hi, this is the Red-Blooded American Girl at redbloodedamerican.girl.com. Come to my blog, check it out, leave a comment, and let me know what you think. Today I want to talk about federal authority. And, I've listened really recently. It's like everybody's reading from the same book, but all these liberals are complaining about Dick Cheney. In fact, they like Dick Cheney less, I think, than George Bush. Now, I'm not going to talk about whether you have to like him or not, but what I find funny is how they have argued that the vice presidency has expanded its role under the Bush presidency. And I find this kind of amusing because if you're worried about the executive branch and what the Constitution demands, I don't think that what Vice President Cheney has done is all that extraordinary given the history of the executive branch. And if you're worried about expansion of executive authority, I think you're about 60 or 70 years too late. Let me explain that. Look, the vice president, at least, is constitutionally authorized. Where does the Constitution mention the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, or these other cabinet members? It doesn't. Those were created by the executive branch, and these people, well, look at Hank Paulson, Secretary of the Treasury. I mean, he has charge of $700 billion with the bailout plan. Why isn't everybody up in arms about who is this person who has this huge spending authority that Congress didn't even really put limits on his spending authority? Who is going to get the money? I mean, this is a tremendous usurpation of legislative authority. I mean, Congress has the spending power, but when you give $700 billion carte blanche to a cabinet secretary and tell him he can spend it how he wants, I have a real problem with that. Look, federal agencies are under the executive department. That's who the big behemoth is. Congress creates them, but the executive runs with them. And here's something that most Americans don't realize, is that these executive agencies have law-making authority. They don't call them laws, they call them regulations, but they have the force and power of law. For example, and I'll just use one example, and that is, under the Bush administration, the amount of wetlands in the United States doubled. Well, it wasn't that the land suddenly changed character. It was that a federal agency changed its regulations so that suddenly things that weren't wetlands before were suddenly defined as wetlands. That happened without a single thing being done by Congress. That was done all by a legislative agency, or rather an administrative agency. And what that meant was that millions and millions of acres of private property suddenly couldn't be developed without obtaining a federal permit. That's a huge usurpation of power. I call it a usurpation of power. And most people think that laws are made by Congress, but most of the regulations that people live under are made by executive agencies, and they don't even pay attention to what's going on there. That's where the bureaucracy comes in. That's where all the red tape comes in government conduct. So if you're going to worry about federal power and federal authority, Dick Cheney is nothing what's going on there. If you're worried about power being exercised by the executive branch, you better start paying attention to executive agencies.